It's Tuesday, it's the 15th of July. I'm Moon Gun-young. This is ARIRANG News live from Seoul. Our top stories today. South Korea launches a 50-membered presidential committee designed to carry out the government's reunification drive with a China expert named as deputy head. President Park will host a special Korea-ASEAN summit in Korea's southeastern port city of Busan in December. Now, some expect the overall economic impact from hosting the two-day event to be more than $65 million. And Israel and its main militant Gaza adversary weigh an Egyptian ceasefire proposal, signaling a possible de-escalation of a week-old aerial battle that has left nearly 200 Palestinians dead. We'll have those stories and more, but first, let's begin right here in this country. President Park earlier this year unveiled her inter-Korean reunification drive, calling it a bonanza. She said she would launch a special committee in charge of making preparations for Korean reunification. And today, the Korean leader disclosed the lineup for that preparatory committee. Our correspondent Choo-sun is live on the line from the presidential office of Cheong Wa Dae. So, Yoo-sun, we now have a better idea of who will be running what and how on this committee.
Hi, Kon-young. The 50-member Joint Government Civilian Committee, chaired by President Park, has been tasked to discuss and seek ways to systematically prepare for Korean reunification and to set a direction for the unprecedented process. Two vice chairs have been named: Unification Minister Ryu Gil-jae, representing the government side, and Chung Jong-wook, current chair professor at Incheon National University and former senior presidential foreign secretary, representing the civilian side. The presidential office cited Chung's vast experience and knowledge in academia, public administration, and diplomacy in his selection. On the civilian side, 29 members with a background related to reunification issues will be divided into 4 subcommittees according to their fields of expertise: foreign affairs and security, the economy, society and culture, and politics and law. They will be joined by another group of specialized advisors within the 4 subgroups to carry out in-depth discussions and research to put forth a blueprint for unified Korea. On the government side, the unification minister will be joined by 10 members, including the ministers of finance, foreign affairs, and defense, as well as the senior presidential foreign secretary. As President Park had proposed during talks with the floor leaders of the ruling and opposition parties last week, the policy chiefs of both parties have been named as the 2 members representing parliament. And the remaining 6 members from state-run research institutes have been tasked to help further boost cooperation between the government and civilian sector. While not included in the 50-member list, the presidential office said advisors from civic groups, the media, and the educational community will be asked to meet with the committee on a regular basis to offer their views and deliver public opinions on reunification. The committee will convene for the first time in early August to decide on its goals and direction. This was Choo-sun reporting on President Park's new reunification preparatory committee.
All right, thank you, Yoo-sun, for that. Now, staying at the nation's top office, President Park has met with the ruling party's new leadership at the presidential office of Cheong Wa Dae over a luncheon. Now, during her talks with Kim Moo-sung, now he was elected as the Saenuri Party's new chairman at a party convention yesterday, Monday that is, the president was expected to seek parliamentary cooperation in swiftly passing a bill related to April's ferry disaster, as well as bills on boosting the domestic economy. President Park is expected to ask the National Assembly to confirm 3 of her controversial cabinet nominees later this Tuesday, and this meeting could have an effect on her final decision. As we just briefly mentioned, the ruling Saenuri Party chose a 5-term lawmaker, Kim Moo-sung, to lead the Conservative Party for the next 2 years. And it looks like it will be a very different 2 years than the previous ones, as the new party leader has signaled to take a different approach when it comes to the party's relations with the Park administration. Our Kim Myung-gil reports on the anticipated changes.
5-term lawmaker Kim Moo-sung, who represents the non-mainstream faction of the party, secured a comfortable win over pro-Park heavyweight Seo Chung-won at the Saenuri Party convention on Monday. With Kim now in charge, the ruling party's relationship with the presidential house of Cheong Wa Dae is expected to undergo significant changes. The newly elected leader promised to establish a relationship of healthy tension between the party and the president, and to speak out against President Park Geun-hye's administration when necessary, while at the same time vowing to help out the president in her drive for reforms. He's also signaled he would reach across the aisle to the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, which favored Kim in the Saenuri Party leadership race due to his relative independence from the president's influence. All are challenges Kim faces over the next couple of years, but his most immediate one will be preparing his party for by-elections in just 2 weeks' time, in which 15 parliamentary seats are up for grabs. Kim Moo-sung, ARIRANG News.
Well, the Korean government is faced with a number of economic challenges, including sluggish domestic consumption, but the ministries that should be tackling the problems are short-staffed. An estimated 80 high-level positions and heads of public institutions are currently unoccupied, including 3 high-level positions in the Prime Minister's office and 5 at the Ministry of Strategy and Finance. Political watchers say the ministries are having a difficult time at filling the vacancies because of more stringent appointment practices that seek to end collusive ties between government officials and the private sector. These ties were singled out as one of the main factors in April's deadly ferry accident that left more than 300 or at least 290-something people dead or missing. Now, President Park Geun-hye will hold a summit talks with the 10 leaders of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations later this year, right here in Korea. The presidential office of Cheong Wa Dae on Tuesday said talks would be held in Korea's southern port city of Busan on December 11th and 12th and will commemorate the 25th anniversary of diplomatic ties being established between the two sides. ASEAN is Korea's second largest trading partner and its second largest investment destination. South Korea, meanwhile, is showing a bit more flexibility with regard to its economic sanctions on North Korea. Seoul's Unification Ministry says it would use its government-led Inter-Korean Cooperation Fund to support civic groups that provide humanitarian aid to the North Korean people. Well, the government plans to make a total of 3 billion won, that's roughly $3 million available for groups that help in the welfare, agriculture, and livestock sectors in North Korea. This is the first time that the South Korean government is using the fund for humanitarian aid to the north, since a North Korean torpedo attack on the South Korean warship Cheonan killed 46 sailors back in 2010. Now, the two Koreas will meet for working-level talks this week to discuss North Korea's participation in this fall's Asian Games, which will be held in the South Korean city of Incheon. But will the talks lead to improved inter-Korean relations, as the North has claimed? Our Hwang Sung-hee explains.
Thursday's inter-Korean working-level talks will center on North Korea's participation in the upcoming Asian Games in South Korea. Last week, the North said it would be sending a large-scale cheering squad along with athletes to the sporting event, which begins in Incheon on September 19th. Topping the agenda on Thursday will be transportation arrangements for the team, their accommodations, and how the cost of the trip will be covered. The North could also propose forming a joint cheering team, taking part in the opening ceremony as a joint entry, and teaming up North and South Korean athletes in certain events. But the question is whether the North will propose steps to follow through with its special proposal made earlier this month to improve inter-Korean ties, or use the sporting event as an arena for its political propaganda. Some expect the talks could extend beyond the scope of the sporting event.
While the two Koreas are in a state of confrontation, the Incheon Asian Games and the upcoming working-level talks will make a positive contribution to the future of inter-Korean talks and restoring private exchanges.
Amid its recent string of military provocations near the border, North Korea is promoting its participation in the Incheon Asian Games through state-run media, saying its athletes are training vigorously in preparation for the sporting event. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
Well, Washington has condemned North Korea's latest series of missile and artillery test firings, saying such provocations will not guarantee them security nor prosperity. The U.S. State Department and the Pentagon on Monday both urged the North to refrain from actions that threaten peace and stability in the region and fulfill the commitments and promises it made with the international community. The calls come after North Korea fired off around 120 artillery shells from multiple rocket launchers on Monday near the inter-Korean border. A South Korean official said none of the projectiles landed in South Korean territory, but added that it's quite unprecedented for the North to fire rounds so close to the military demarcation line.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Moon Gon-yong live from Seoul.
Global shopping market for the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia. Well, the families of the victims of a senseless massacre during the Sino-Japanese War are demanding an official apology from the Japanese government and hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation. The Chinese government is also continuing its campaign to raise global awareness of Tokyo's wartime atrocities. Here's our Connie Kim.
It's now a peaceful village in Tangshan City, northern China. But it was here in 1941 that Japanese soldiers massacred almost 1,300 Chinese civilians. The reason? The Japanese said the village served as an important fortress for Chinese soldiers during the Sino-Japanese War.
Japanese soldiers deceived them into saying that they would not hit or curse, but killed everyone.
The Pan Village Villagers Committee has requested a private federation, the China Federation of Civil Claims, file a lawsuit against the Japanese government. The committee is demanding an official apology from Tokyo and compensation of more than $950 million. It marks the first time for the families of the victims to file a lawsuit for wartime slaughter. Meanwhile, China has released its latest confession by a Japanese war criminal. Commander Shuichi Kikuchi reveals that he killed 1,122 people, including children, and sexually assaulted 60 women.
The testimony reads he regarded all women in town as enemies and shot everyone to death, including a 4-year-old child and mothers.
The Chinese government has been releasing one confession every day since earlier this month in an attempt to highlight Japan's wartime atrocities. It plans to release 45 in total. In another move to pressure Japan, Beijing plans to open a museum next year commemorating the first Sino-Japanese War that broke out in late 1890s. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
And it's not just historical issues that are enraging neighboring countries like China and Korea. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is defending his controversial push to expand his country's military role, saying it is limited in scope. Now, in his first parliamentary session since his administration's decision to reinterpret Japan's pacifist constitution, Abe played down the expanded rules of engagement of collective self-defense, saying the newly adapted ability to aid a friendly nation under attack is strictly limited to things like minesweeping in the Middle East. Well, he said Tokyo would require a formal constitutional amendment to engage in collective self-defense similar to that of other countries. The Japanese leader also called for talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping during a regional meeting in Beijing in November. Abe made a point of mentioning their massive trading and business ties and added that they had complex links despite rows over territorial and historical grievances. Across the globe, Egypt is calling on Israel and Hamas to agree to a ceasefire as the death toll there exceeds 185. Palestinians were killed in the week-long conflict in Gaza. And that toll now may be increasing. The ceasefire proposal submitted by Egypt is the most thought-out plan just yet, suggested by outside mediators. Our Kim Hyun-bin has the details.
Egypt has proposed a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza that will take effect Tuesday morning, local time. In its proposal, Cairo's foreign ministry is calling on Israel and Palestinians in Gaza to de-escalate their conflict by 9 a.m. local time. after which a full ceasefire will go into effect within 12 hours. This will then be followed by negotiations in Cairo within 48 hours. According to reports, the proposal says Israel should end all hostilities in Gaza from the land, air, and sea, and refrain from launching a ground offensive that targets civilians. Hamas would have to stop firing rockets into Israel. Israel's security cabinet, headed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is set to meet early Tuesday to discuss the proposal. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry may also travel to Cairo Tuesday for talks with Egypt's president. However, the chance of a ceasefire ending a week of cross-border fire looks increasingly unlikely. One of the stumbling blocks is that Hamas wants hundreds of its members who have been detained by Israel to be freed. Israel, on the other hand, says its ongoing attacks are aimed at depleting Hamas and quashing its will to fight. Palestinian militants have resumed rocket attacks on Israel, and despite international pressure for a ceasefire, Israel continues to pound Gaza from the air and sea. Rockets fired from Gaza have been regularly intercepted, and only half a dozen Israelis have been injured. A health official in Gaza says around 180 Palestinians, mostly civilians, have been killed and nearly 1,400 injured since Israel started airstrikes last week. Kim Moo-sung, ARIRANG News.
Now, shifting focus, with the global economy still sputtering along, Korea's largest automaker is stepping up efforts to increase its presence in emerging markets, particularly in the 4 BRICS nations. Hyundai Motor and its affiliate Kia Motors controlled 11% of the combined market in Brazil, Russia, India, and China in the first 5 months of this year, second only to Volkswagen. But during the period, the Korean auto group suffered a year-on-year sales drop of more than 5% each in Russia and Brazil, and a 3% fall in India, largely because of the increasing presence there by Japanese car makers. Hyundai Motor Group Chairman Cheong Wa Dae ordered measures to better compete with Toyota, Nissan, and Honda, which together grabbed a 9% share in the BRICS nations. Meanwhile, those of you in China who use those messaging services like Line or KakaoTalk, you might be having trouble because apparently China has been blocking popular mobile messaging smartphone applications like those since earlier this month. A South Korean diplomat speaking on the condition of anonymity said China informed Korea of the move this Monday, but also said the services would be restored soon. Well, industry sources say the shutdown was a possible attempt by Chinese authorities to block the sharing of information in the run-up to sensitive anniversaries. China maintains a firm grip on the internet. Social networking sites like Facebook and Twitter remain closed off to the general public there. A survey of thousands of foreign tourists has found that Myeongdong, one of Seoul's main shopping and tourism districts, is the most popular and satisfying tourist destinations here in Korea. The Korea Culture and Tourism Institute said Tuesday that out of 12,000 foreign respondents that traveled to this country last year, almost 60% visited Myeongdong. At 33%, it was also the most liked location among foreign travelers. Well, Dongdaemun Market, famous for its fashion district and its new cultural landmark, Dongdaemun Design Plaza, was the second most popular spot. And Gyeongbokgung Palace was in third. 7 out of 10 visitors came to Korea for shopping, 4 out of 10 for the food, followed by city touring and nature experience. And now it's time for our daily arts and culture segment. And of course, our Im Yoon-hee joins me live, and she will be taking a look at Korea's indie music culture. So let's find out what that is. Good afternoon to you, Yoon-hee.
Good afternoon, Kang-young.
So K-pop obviously dominates the music landscape here in Korea, but you've been telling me that indie music is also making a name for itself these days.
So indie rock groups have really been making a name for themselves and catching on here in Korea, especially in the capital, in the Hongdae area, which is a cornucopia for the indie culture where it's thriving. And so in this next report, take a look at a popular indie rock group called 10cm or 10 centimeters and take a look at their latest project.
The two-member band, 10 cm, first debuted in 2010, becoming a rookie amongst emerging Korean indie bands, with the release of their single, Americano. Kwon Jung-yeol and Yoon Chol-jong have both shown off their talents at both instruments and vocals. And after a successful release of their first two albums, the group has come back with a third album set to be released later this year, the title still undecided. They'll be holding a concert next month at Sogang University in order to give a preview of their upcoming album, but also to choose a name for their next album. The concert will consist of interaction between the musicians and the fan members in an intimate setting where the band can get feedback as well as ideas for their third album.
Well, it's interesting how Koreans pronounce 10 centimeters, 10 cm or 10 cm, right?
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about the indie music culture here in Korea. I mean, we talked earlier about Hyundai being one of the hot spots for the indie culture here in the nation.
Right, it's very rich with the indie culture. They have a lot of bars and clubs that feature indie rock bands, and they just really thrive on the indie culture and really, progress the culture as a whole.
Right, and with indie bands, I would imagine that they would have a different goal than, say, of K-pop bands, right?
Right, so the definition of this whole indie culture is alternative rock. So they do have different goals per se. A lot of the indie musicians say they want to really reach their audience and people with their music and their lyrics. They want to touch on the emotions of their people. And so it's interesting to see how the indie culture here in Korea was heavily influenced in the beginning by Britain and the US, but it really has developed into its own unique Korean indie culture that really has been thriving despite, the very overcasting shadow of K-pop.
Well, speaking of foreign music impact on Korea, now Korea is now independent enough to have a collaboration with other countries.
Right. So today I have another look at another artist who is a collaboration between Korea and Sweden. And so for all the fans of Kim Moo-sung, he's a very well-known artist here. And so there's an artist who has a remake of one of his popular tunes. Take a look.
Swedish pop singer Andreas Sandlund is no stranger to Korea. He successfully released the albums Destiny and Sacred Love in Korea over the past couple years. But his most recent project involves the first ever English remake of a song by legendary Korean singer Kim Kwang-seok. The late singer was a major force of music in Korea during the 80s and early 90s, and his passionate lyrics touched the hearts of many. His song, Love Has Gone, will be remade into a pop ballad by Sandlund under the preliminary title, Though I Gave My Love to You. The song is set to be performed later this year at the Paju Folk Festival by Sandlund, alongside Korean singer and songwriter Han Dong-jun.
Kim Kwang-seok's songs, they're still very popular, even amongst the younger generation here in Korea. And his sudden death really tugged on the heartstrings of all Koreans here.
Right, so you can see his influence even to this day. He's originally from Daegu, that's where he was born. And there is a Kim Kwang-seok road that they dedicated to him, and they have a memorial every year. And they also have a concert celebrating all his creations and all of his works that he really produced a few decades ago.
Right, because he is considered one of the biggest folk song singers in Korean history.
Right, and so hopefully with this English remake of his song that it'll really put him as an artist on the global map as well as Korea's music. So we'll have to wait and see.
Well, definitely we'll keep an eye on how that project works out to be. All right, Yoonhee, thank you so much for the report, and we will see you tomorrow.
See you then.
Good afternoon. The scorching hot weather continues all across the nation. However, monsoon rain is expected throughout the week, starting today in Jeju Island and the southern regions, where between 30 and 80 millimeters of precipitation will fall. Now, strong winds and thunderstorms are also in the forecast down south, whereas the rest of Korea can expect a cloudy day, which will clear as we move through into the day. Now, aside from that, the weather conditions are basically the same as yesterday, and the temperatures will rise up into the 30s and in most regions, and with high humidity and UV levels. Now, going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will top out at 31 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will peak up to 28 and 26 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 26, Dokdo at 28, while Mount Kumgang tops out to 30. Well, that's all for now. Michelle Park, and back to you, Kanyang.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for that. And that's just about all from me at this hour. I'm Moon Kanyang. Check back with us at 4 p.m. Korea time for Business Today.